Welcome to Faith Unfiltered, where truth is not only spoken, but felt. In this powerful episode, prepare for a chilling revelation that unravels secrets long buried beneath the surface of the Daystar legacy. For the first time, Rebecca Lamb courageously steps forward to expose disturbing truths surrounding her mother, Joni Lamb, and Joni's new husband, Dr. Doug Weiss. What was once kept tightly sealed behind family walls is now front and center, and the impact is seismic. The Daystar family's internal conflict has reached a boiling point. What Rebecca reveals is not just uncomfortable, it's explosive. Her decision to speak out defies years of silence, secrecy, and emotional suppression. Viewers will be shocked, moved, and perhaps unsettled as she lays bare the reality behind the polished public image. Rebecca and her husband, J.W., lived under the weight of a legal non-disclosure agreement, NDA, a contract that not only muzzled their voices, but also erased their ability to advocate for justice within their own family. It wasn't just legal, it was emotional confinement. It silenced her maternal instincts. It forced her to watch in anguish as troubling behaviors unfolded, especially concerning Pete, a trusted relative whose actions raised serious concerns for the safety of Rebecca's own child. The moment she saw baby Lamb in proximity to Pete, her heart sank. A mother's intuition screamed that something wasn't right. But every time Rebecca tried to voice her fears, she was met with the invisible wall of legal restraint and emotional intimidation. Her silence wasn't just enforced, it was haunted. It felt like someone was constantly watching, judging, controlling every word she dared to speak. And yet, through it all, her love for her family didn't waver. It trapped her, yes, but it also defined her resilience. She held her family close, even when the cost felt unbearable. Now that strength has become her voice. This video isn't just a story, it's a reckoning. It will shake the very foundation of Daystar, ignite conversations across communities, and perhaps inspire others who've endured the weight of secrecy to finally step into the light. Bound by silence, driven by conscience. Rebecca Lamb found herself in a deeply personal and painful bind, one not formed by strangers, but by the very people she loved most. The family name she had always carried with pride, the Daystar legacy built on unity, faith, and ministry, had become a double-edged sword. It wasn't just a badge of honor, it had become her cage. On one hand stood loyalty. Rebecca had grown up in a household led by Marcus and Joni Lamb, where faith, family, and public image were cherished and fiercely protected. She was taught that standing together, even in silence, was part of maintaining unity. On the other hand loomed her conscience, a rising inner voice that questioned whether silence equaled complicity. For too long, Rebecca wrestled with the unbearable weight of a truth she felt she could not share. The non-disclosure agreement, NDA, she and her husband, J.W., were bound to wasn't just a legal contract. It was a muzzle on her heart and soul. She felt haunted by what she knew, especially the behavior of Pete, a trusted relative whose actions left her unsettled and deeply concerned for the safety of her child, affectionately known as Baby Lamb. Every glance at Baby Lamb stirred a storm of guilt inside her. Her maternal instinct screamed that something was wrong, but the grip of legal restrictions and fear of family retaliation left her paralyzed. The longer she remained quiet, the heavier her silence became. It was no longer about reputation. It became about morality, about responsibility, about courage. As days passed, the emotional toll grew unbearable. Rebecca wasn't just protecting others, she was eroding herself. The tension, the fear, the shame of withholding what she knew were cracks in the facade of loyalty. Her silence, once meant to preserve peace, was now fueling her torment. There came a moment, a sharp, irreversible breaking point, when Rebecca could no longer deny the truth. The cost of her silence was too steep, the moral conflict too agonizing. She realized that protecting her family didn't mean hiding the truth. It meant facing it, no matter the consequences. This wasn't just a battle between right and wrong. It was a soul-shaking reckoning. For Rebecca Lamb, loyalty was sacred, but integrity was divine. After the sudden passing of her father, Marcus Lamb, in 2021, Rebecca Lamb found herself staring down a new chapter. one marked by uncertainty, grief, and unexpected shifts in her family's foundation. The once tightly woven fabric of the Lamb household began to stretch and fray, with Joni Lamb, her mother, stepping into a more visible role at Daystar, the Christian network they had built together. In the midst of mourning, Rebecca watched her mother navigate a storm of change. What once was sacred felt rushed and unsettling. Dr. Doug Weiss, a longtime family friend and marriage counselor, became a more prominent figure, initially offering support, but quickly evolving into something more personal. Rebecca wasn't opposed to her mom finding companionship again, but the speed, the intensity, the timing left her concerned. It wasn't just about Joni's grief, it was about what this relationship represented, especially to the public eye. Daystar wasn't just a network, it was a symbol. The Lamb family had long been seen as torchbearers of Christian values, pillars of integrity, and examples of faith-centered living. Rebecca feared that her mother's quick transition would lead believers to question everything, from Joni's sincerity in her marriage vows to the moral fabric behind the Daystar mission. Rebecca tried to voice her thoughts delicately and respectfully, but every attempt was met with resistance, as if her words were swept away in the momentum of Joni's newfound romance. To Rebecca, it felt like being shut out, ignored, replaced. A once open line of family communication now felt fractured and fragile. The more Rebecca observed, the more unsettled she became. This wasn't just about Joni, it was about legacy, loyalty, and accountability. The Lamb name carried expectations, and Rebecca had been raised to live up to them. She struggled to reconcile her devotion to her family with her commitment to truth. Her heart urged her to protect the values her parents had instilled in her. Values built not on blind allegiance, but on honesty and moral clarity. And yet, every time she tried to share her worries, she was told she didn't understand, that she was overreacting, that it wasn't her place. The emotional distance widened, and Rebecca's internal conflict deepened. She didn't want to be the antagonist in her mother's story, but she also didn't want to stay silent as decisions unfolded that could impact everything her family had built. This isn't just a story about grief or moving on. It's a story about legacy, spiritual responsibility, and the emotional tightrope walked by someone caught between protecting her loved ones and defending her convictions. In the shadow of family legacy and public ministry, Rebecca Lamb found herself drowning in emotional complexity. The Daystar Network, once a symbol of unity, faith, and shared purpose, was fracturing from the inside out. Following her father's death and her mother's evolving relationship with Dr. Doug Weiss, Rebecca wasn't just facing grief. She was confronting a new reality that felt foreign and deeply troubling. Tensions weren't limited to the family dinner table. Inside Daystar's operations, pressure mounted. As her mother Joni's romance with Doug began to strain familial ties, Rebecca watched in heartbreak as her once close-knit clan drifted apart. Every time she tried to voice her concern about the family, about their mission, about the values they stood for, she was met with silence or exclusion. Joni seemed to hold all the cards, while Rebecca's voice was buried under the weight of diplomacy and avoidance. The ministry they built together was no longer the glue holding them steady. Their core principles, faith, transparency, and spiritual integrity, felt compromised. Rebecca wasn't just upset, she was devastated. She had spent her life upholding the Lamb name and its purpose. Watching it erode from within was soul-crushing, and beneath all of that lay the chain around her voice, a legally binding non-disclosure agreement, NDA. It wasn't simply a piece of paper. It was the lock on her lips as she witnessed disturbing conduct, backdoor dealings, and a growing disconnection from the original mission of Daystar. Her hands were tied and her spirit was weary. Every day, silence screamed louder. Rebecca's emotional burden spiraled. Guilt, anger, fear. She feared that by staying quiet, she was betraying herself, her values, and the very legacy she loved. Yet speaking up felt like betrayal too, a betrayal of her mother, of her family, of the unity she'd tried to protect. The shame of inaction gnawed at her heart. Eventually, the strain became unbearable. Rebecca began pulling away from conversations, from relationships, even from her own thoughts. She was emotionally unraveling. Yet the real catalyst wasn't just personal heartbreak. It was the crushing truth that she had carried in silence for far too long. At last, the pressure shattered the wall around her. Rebecca realized that protecting her family didn't mean hiding its faults. It meant confronting them so that healing could begin. The weight of secrecy had become too heavy, and while speaking up might cost her dearly, remaining silent would cost her even more. From the outside, the Lamb family represented unity, legacy, and spiritual strength. But behind closed doors, Rebecca Lamb was suffocating under the weight of secrets, emotional isolation, and a creeping fracture in everything she once held dear. Her family taught her the value of honesty and staying true to her beliefs, but now those very values were being tested in a battle between loyalty and integrity. After the sudden death of Marcus Lamb in 2021, Rebecca watched her world shift. Her mother, Joni Lamb, became the center of Daystar's operations, thrust into solo leadership after decades of partnership. While grieving, Joni made rapid decisions that startled Rebecca, none more controversial than her swift relationship with Dr. Doug Weiss, a family friend and marriage counselor. The issue wasn't Doug himself. It was what the relationship symbolized. To Rebecca, it felt like Marcus's legacy was being replaced before the family, or the public, had time to process the loss. Their ministry had always emphasized faith, patience, and the sanctity of marriage, and now that message felt blurred. Rebecca wondered, what would viewers think? Would this shake their trust in Daystar? Would it seem like Joni was dishonoring her late husband's memory? Worse, each time Rebecca tried to express her feelings, she was met with subtle deflection or outright dismissal. The bond she once treasured with her mother was fading. Emotional walls replaced heartfelt conversations. What used to be open dialogue had become a series of guarded exchanges. Rebecca was being pushed further into the margins of her own family. But the turmoil ran deeper. Rebecca had been carrying a mountain of emotional weight, not just from strained relationships, but from the pressure to keep silent, uphold appearances, and juggle conflicting desires. A non-disclosure agreement, NDA, bound her to silence about disturbing developments behind the scenes, issues that conflicted with the values she'd been raised on. Her conscience roared louder by the day. She felt like she was unraveling. What was once a source of joy, being near her family, now stirred grief and guilt. The emotional gap between her and her loved ones widened, and shame began pulling her toward the only path that felt honest, revealing the truth. But the stakes were high. Rebecca faced a gut-wrenching dilemma. Should she preserve the family name by continuing to stay quiet, or would she risk everything, her relationships, her reputation, her place within Daystar, to honor her beliefs and speak the truth? Either way, the cost was immense. Months of buried disagreements had finally erupted into chaos. The once stable structure of the Lamb family was now cracked, and Rebecca was caught in the center of the storm. She wasn't just battling opinions, she was fighting for the soul of her family, for the values Daystar stood upon, and for her own peace of mind. The decision before her was life-altering: protect the illusion or confront reality. There was no going back. Rebecca Lamb had to choose between comfort and conviction, and the future of Daystar and her place within it hung in the balance. To Rebecca Lamb, watching her mother Joni move on so quickly after the death of her father, Marcus, wasn't just painful, it felt like a betrayal. Their family had always stood for something bigger than themselves: faith, loyalty, and honesty. But now, that foundation felt shaken. Marcus's passing left a void, not just in their hearts, but in the spiritual mission they'd built together. When Joni began dating Dr. Doug Weiss soon after, Rebecca's concern wasn't just about the relationship, it was about what it signaled to the world. Would the ministry's supporters begin to doubt the Lamb family's principles? Would their community question whether their public image matched the values they'd always preached? Rebecca's unease turned from quiet discomfort to outright distress. She had always been forthright and passionate, someone who believed in open, honest dialogue. So she tried. Time and again, she approached Joni to express her thoughts with vulnerability, with respect, with urgency, but the response was consistent: dismissal and defensiveness. At first, Joni would change the subject. Later, she outright rejected Rebecca's concerns. What began as emotional distance became a deep rupture. Joni was absorbed in her new romance while Rebecca was still grieving, not just her father's absence, but what felt like the loss of her mother, too. And it wasn't simply about romantic choices. This was about leadership, legacy, and the direction of a ministry they had all fought to protect. The family used to be unified, collaborating, praying, and decision-making together. But now, Joni was steering the ship alone. Rebecca, once integral to the family's mission, had been sidelined, left with no voice in critical decisions that shaped their public and private lives. Then came May 2023, a few weeks before Joni's wedding to Doug. The tension reached a boiling point in an unexpected raw confrontation between mother and daughter. No pre-scheduled talk, no time for reflection, just months of suppressed emotion exploding into a painful exchange. Rebecca, holding nothing back, told her mother the truth. You're not giving yourself time to mourn. And this decision could tarnish everything our family has built. Her voice trembled, not with anger, but heartbreak. She wasn't trying to control her mother's life. She was trying to protect their legacy, their name, their reputation, and their spiritual mission. But Joni, caught in her own grief and perhaps defensive resolve, retaliated with fury instead of compassion. I'm trying to move on, she snapped, her tone laced with frustration. To her, Rebecca's words felt like judgment. To Rebecca, her mother's reaction felt like rejection. What Rebecca wanted was simple: time, honesty, reflection. What she received was resistance. Their bond, once unbreakable, was now clouded by miscommunication and pain. And while Rebecca never intended to take control of her mother's choices, she believed there was too much at stake to remain silent. Rebecca Lamb didn't just fear losing her mother to a new relationship. She feared losing the values that had once held her family together. The situation with Doug Weiss wasn't simply about romance. It was about a slow unraveling of trust, shared beliefs, and emotional connection. The Lamb family had long stood for faith, loyalty, and spiritual integrity, with Daystar representing their unified mission. But when Joni Lamb chose to move forward with Doug following Marcus's passing, it triggered something deeper for Rebecca. She worried that her mother was gravitating towards someone and a life that no longer reflected their foundational convictions. After a tense and unresolved dispute, Rebecca was left devastated. She had long turned to her mother for guidance and encouragement, but now those moments of warmth were replaced with tension, avoidance, and emotional distance. The woman she had admired so deeply was slipping into someone unfamiliar, more focused on her relationship than on the values and unity they once championed. The emotional strain was immense. Rebecca felt as if she were plummeting into a chasm of confusion and isolation. Their bond, once built on mutual respect and spiritual closeness, was now fractured. With each passing day, her despair intensified. Her once safe haven had turned into a battlefield where communication collapsed, faith wavered, and identity felt lost. Rebecca tried to speak up again and again, but her voice echoed into silence. Her concerns were brushed aside, reframed as overreactions, or simply ignored. It felt like Joni had stopped listening, consumed by a relationship that Rebecca feared was rewriting their family's future. Once united by purpose, their connection was now riddled with silence and growing resentment. Rebecca no longer felt part of the ministry she helped build, nor the family legacy she'd honored all her life. Decisions were made without her. Her voice was left out of conversations that mattered. And the more Doug's presence grew, the more Rebecca felt like an outsider, disconnected from the very roots of her identity. But her pain wasn't just about being excluded. It was about a larger spiritual fracture. What Joni did wasn't the only concern. What it represented was far more profound: the possible dismantling of Marcus's legacy and the principles Daystar had been founded upon. Each day, Rebecca watched the familiar foundations of her world crumble. The tension between mother and daughter was thick and unspoken, charged and ready to explode. She knew something had to give. But with Joni fully committed to her relationship, it was clear things would not change unless Rebecca took action. She could no longer mask her emotions or pretend that everything was fine. The silence had become unbearable. And while Joni's heart was set, Rebecca's soul was screaming for truth, reconciliation, and restoration. Rebecca Lamb stood on the edge, mentally exhausted, spiritually frayed, and emotionally isolated. The family she had helped nurture, the ministry she had poured her heart into, and the legacy built alongside her parents at Daystar Television were all slipping away. And no amount of loyalty or effort seemed capable of stopping the collapse. What began as a disagreement between Rebecca and her mother, Joni Lamb, escalated into something far deeper than a personal dispute. It exposed the structural cracks within the Lamb family itself, fractures not easily healed with time or words. Rebecca didn't just feel unheard, she felt erased. As Daystar's direction shifted, so too did the relationships that once anchored her. Questions loomed about the ministry's future, Joni's leadership, and her increasingly public relationship with Doug Weiss. But Rebecca's concerns weren't rooted in jealousy or resistance to change. They were grounded in heartbreak. The values of faith, honesty, and family unity, once sacred, now seemed negotiable. For Rebecca, the emotional toll was staggering. She had always been the family's quiet warrior, the one who defended them when things got tough, who carried their burdens when they couldn't. But after their explosive confrontation, the fallout left her emotionally and spiritually drained. This wasn't just about being on the outside of a personal disagreement. This was a severance from the very soul of her identity. The woman she once revered as a strong, compassionate mother now felt cold and unreachable. Joni, wrapped tightly in her decisions, offered no room for reflection or dialogue. Their once vibrant conversations became subdued. Silences stretched longer. Rebecca's voice, once rooted in conviction, now echoed without response. Daystar wasn't just an organization to her. It was a shared mission, a legacy she helped build with her parents. But the ministry, like her family, was shifting without her. She no longer recognized the pulse that once made it special. Her contribution seemed forgotten, her presence irrelevant. Isolated further by the emotional walls being raised around her, even Rebecca's connection with her brother Jonathan faltered. He, too, seemed lost in his own reactions to the crumbling family dynamic. Their shared understanding faded into distance. What was once a powerful family unit was now a scatter of individuals, each struggling with their own emotional burdens. Church gatherings, family dinners, ministry meetings, places that once brought joy and connection, now felt hollow. Familiar routines turned into painful reminders of what was lost. Rebecca didn't just miss her family, she missed who they used to be. In the midst of it all, Rebecca remained the one determined to speak the truth, to stand up for what was right. But now her voice was met with silence, her passion dismissed, her longing to protect the family legacy branded as opposition. And as the emotional distance grew, Rebecca was forced to confront an agonizing truth. Her mother's choices, though personal, were altering the trajectory of everything they had once stood for. And the cost of staying silent or of speaking up could redefine their legacy forever.